So the text that you have in front of you this evening is a piece from Mesilas Yesharim, the Mussar classic, written by the very great philosopher, Kabbalist, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal. I know many of you are familiar with it, but there's a piece here in which he lays down for us in a very precise way fundamental concepts in understanding Hashem and his relationship to us, and most notably as they relate to din, chesed, and teshuva. And he's going to ask a series of questions, and in the answer give a definition of teshuva, which hopefully, time permitting, we will expand upon if we get time, using an incredible idea from Reb Tzadok HaKohen, and hopefully that will give us a pathway through, partly through Rosh Hashanah, which we've spoken about a bit already in previous Shurim, but equally for the other part of Teshuva, which is the Aseres Yemei Teshuva and Yom HaKippurim. Okay? So let's just dive right in. And I may follow with me in the text. I may skip over some bits as I go through it. Ubeperek HaKol Chayov in Omru, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan can't have a motel haikro have a bochi. When Rabbi Yochanan read the following posuk, he used to cry. V'koravti aleichem lamishpot v'hoyisi eid memahir. The posuk says in Malachi, that says Hashem, the time will come when I will bring myself close to you, la mishpat, for judgment and justice, v'hoyisi eid memahir, and I will be a witness, even a witness, but an eid memahir meaning a diligent witness, where I will be a in other words, the concept, there's the underneath there, the ones the menukad is probably easier for people. No, we finished? There's no more left? There you go. There you go. So Malachi says that the time will come when Hashem will draw himself near to us for the purpose of judging us. V'hoyisi eid v'mahir, and says Hashem, I will be a diligent witness. I will be Hashem will act not just as a judge, but even as a witness, which is itself an interesting concept to think about. And Rabbi Yochanan would cry, and he said, Eved shashaykelim alav kalas kechamuris takana yeshloi. A servant who is judged with precision. Kalos kechamuros. Now let's assume that there is a weighting, W-E-I-G-H, Gewicht. Sagt man Gewicht? Okay. Was?
Eine Gewichtung.
Eine Gewichtung. Natürlich. So that's what I meant by sheshoiklim. Kalos kechamuros. Nothing escapes Hashem, as it were. Everything, in other words, the key concept here is, let's put it in very simple English, there will come a time when there will be absolute accountability for every thought, word, and deed. Is there then a way out? Is there a way around this? This is frightening. Now, he then adds, and I'm going to skip over this because otherwise we really will run out of time for the rest of the paragraph. And the Ramchal explains what this means. He says, of course, it doesn't mean that Hashem judges the smallest thing that we do wrong and gives it the same severity as something big. Of course not. That's not what it means. But do you know what it does mean? It means, as many of the Mefarshim say, the Rambam, the Sforno, and many others, they say that it's not like your bank account. How does your bank account work? Debits and credits, and they cancel each other out. Doesn't work that way with Averos and Mitzvahs. They do not cancel each other out. For every Avera, there will be accountability, and for every Mitzvah, big or small, it's irrelevant. Because that is correct, that is fair, that is just. They don't cancel each other out. So everything is taken into account. And here, let me give you an analogy, which he really says, but I'm going to put it in my own words, if I may. Imagine, after 120 years, you get to Shamayim, right? You get to the pearly gates, and the Malach there is looking at the list of things that that weren't so great. Maybe not so good. And he's going through that list. And you realize that actually there's a whole bunch of things which are not on the list. What do? You sigh a sigh of relief, right? What you don't do is, you say, excuse me, Mr. Malach, you've missed out. You just say, phew. Baruch Hashem, there was some sort of glitch in the celestial computer system. Phew, wow, great. Now let's flip it. Let's flip the scenario. You're on the line for Gan Eden, the good stuff. And he's going through the list of all the things, and there's a whole bunch of things missing. What do? Excuse me? Excuse me? Do you know who I am? I did this, I did it. Make up your mind. Asks the Ramchal, you have to be consistent. You have to be fair. As the Israelis say, Mashe nachon, nachon. Either. You can't have it both ways. You can't have the expectation that the bad stuff, well, I hope he sort of overlooks and, sweeps it under the carpet. But the good stuff, I'm going to be on top of those malach and make sure I get every single reward for every... It's one or the other. You've got to be consistent. There's a... Yes, I'm going to. But I'm not going to go into it in depth because it's a whole separate share. There is a pasuk in this week's parasha, in Ha'azinu. Hatzur tomim pa'aloi ki chol d'rochav mishpat. The rock, whose actions are perfect, are correct. Ki chol d'rochav mishpat. All his ways are judgment and justice. All his ways, not some. All. Kol d'rochav mishpat. All his ways are mishpat. Eilemuna, he is faithful. Ve'ein ovel, does no injustice. Tzaddik v'yosher. Chol d'rochav mishpat. And as he quotes here the Gemara, which says that anybody who says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is vatran, vatranut is the midah of to concede, to forego. Nochgeben? Sagt man auf Deutsch? Nachgeben. Nachgeben. That means, never mind. Anybody who says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is vatran, yivatru ma'oihi, which means his stomach should be, basically means you forfeit your life. It's a very strong lashon. So that's a Gemara. What does that mean? And how do we square this with other sources which actually use the word vitur with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? I can't give, that was what you were asking. Viter HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'lo viter al ma'aseh shel Torah is another Gemara. So we do have that word. It's a much bigger topic, and it's a problematic topic, but we're not going to deal with that Nakuda tonight because there's no time, but we're going to look at the central concept. Let me put it to you in these terms. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter used to say, and his Talmidim tell us over, Rabbi Yitzchak Blazer tells us over, that they say when we get to Shamayim, after 120 years, we will not recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does that mean? Because here we are conditioned to all these notions of chesed and rachamim and forgiving and never mind and I'll okay, erech hapayim. This is the Yud Gimel Midas, which really deserve a whole series of shurim on their own. I spoke about it a little bit last night before Slichas. The Yud Gimel Midas, these 13 aspects and expressions of Hashem's interaction with us are only valid as long as there is breath in our body. Once that is no longer the case, then there is accountability, and that is total and it's absolute. And that's just fair. That's as it is and as it should be. Ki chol derach of mishpat. Melech oihev tzedakah u mishpat. By the way, there's only 2 brachas in Shemona Esra where in the conclusion of the bracha we ascribe an emotion to Hashem. Most of them are very factual. He is Reifech Amo Yisrael, Beinei Yerushalayim, Goyel Yisrael. There's 2 where we have an emotion. One is Roitze B'Shuva, and we'll have to leave that. Roitze B'Shuva, or maybe we will come back to that. Hashem is Roitze B'Shuva, he wants. And then there's another one which is Melech Oihev Tzedakah u Mishpat. He loves Tzedakah u Mishpat. First of all, how does Tzedakah u Mishpat come into the same? Tzedakah means tzedek, which means what is correct. We have a whole different notion of tzedakah. Tzedakah is not charity. That is so wrong at many different levels. Because then it becomes a discretionary activity. It becomes, you wish to give charity. If you're going, in secular terms, it is something which is voluntary. You want to give charity. By the way, we don't have that. You have hilchos tzedakah. You have to. And there are laws that govern it. So it's not a discretionary, voluntary activity. There may be within Hilchas Tzedakah some bits which are, but the concept. So it is tzedek, it is correct and right and appropriate. Same word as tzaddik. Somebody who does that which is right, not just voluntary, as opposed to a chassid. That's the difference between a tzaddik and a chassid. A tzaddik does what is correct, a chassid goes above and beyond. So tzedek is what is correct. And mishpat, judgment, justice. So,
and that's the bracha, that's one of the bracha.
Correct. That needs a bit more explanation, because we have melech there anyway. So actually all we're doing is we're taking out the oihed tzedakah. Again, not for now. Great question. Very good question. Whereas the other one, and by the way, if you forget or you mess that one up, that's why you don't have to go back, because it has in it anyway melech. Whereas if you say okay, HaKodesh, not melech HaKodesh, then you do have to go back, because it's fine. Good point. So let's get back. So Seder Bitzel Blazer, Seder B'Yisrael Salam, until we get to Shamayim, we will not recognize Hashem, because we get so conditioned to the notion of Hashem just being like this, I don't know, benevolent uncle, this grandfatherly figure who just pats us on the head every Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur and says, there, never mind, don't do it again. That is, this is what we're going to talk about. There will come a time, and there has to come a time, because that is appropriate, that is correct, it's just emes. It's the olam ha'emes. We enter the realm of where there is only what there is, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So here we have a problem. Let's go to the bottom of the page, because we will run out of time. So he asks 3 questions. The Ramchal therefore formulates 3 questions. Again, we're only scratching the surface here, but, an introduction to the question is to explain what I think I've mentioned in previous shurim, forgive me, is we've got to use our terms here quite precisely. And that is, we need to understand the difference between chesed and rachamim. They are not one and the same. Chesed is giving, altruism. It is a motivation, it is a midah of just giving. Giving and giving and giving. It has nothing to do with the recipient. It has totally to do with the midah. It's a motivation, by the way. It's not an act. It's a motivation. It is giving. It has an opposite. It has a counterpart, which is called din, or gevura, which is only that which is deserved. Exact opposites. They are incompatible. And then we have something in between called rachamim, which is a little bit of, it's an accommodation. It is a pshara, it is a compromise. It allows for chesed and din to be accommodated. And this, of course, is Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and this is every 3 in Judaism. It's always this idea. A thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Things that are opposites and appear to be total, cannot coexist. And then and by the way, this is the human being. Who are we? What are we? If not an impossible hybrid? We are the neshama, tahira, kadesha, chatzua, mitachas kisei hakovod. And It is inside a physical body. You cannot get two more impossibly polar opposites. That's nuts. But somehow they have to coexist and together and only together create something amazing, transcendental, something that is much, much more than the sum of its components. And that's what we're going to talk about. Yes?
Where in Rachamim is the din inside? Like, I understand that
I'm going
it's
to explain.
not just that it's the recipient and the giver.
That's exactly what we're going to explain. Give me a chance. Haven't even started. Absolutely correct. So here's the thing. And this is what we need to understand. Yaakov Avinu somehow manages to accommodate the loving kindness of his grandfather, the absolute din, the pachad yitzchok of his father, and create something which is invariably either called Torah, Emes, Tiferes, Rachamim. It has a number of different manifestations. By the way, that's why Mariv, which is Kneged Yaakov, starts with the words V'hu Rachum. Because that's his midah, and we'll see whether we get back to it. That phrase is going to be very important for us. Asks the Mesilas Yesharim, V'im Toima, about 6 lines up, V'im Toima, beginning of the line, towards the end. Im Kain, if this is so, if we have established the supremacy, the absolute need for din, that din is the right thing, emes, accountability, Im Kain Midas HaRachamim, Lama Hi Omedes, what is the purpose of Midas HaRachamim? Notice he doesn't ask, how can it exist? He asks why it exists. And that itself is something to think about. But he says, why does it exist? What is the point of it? Given that at some point, there has to be accountability. So why have din? Why delay, so to speak, the inevitable? That's his question. You could have asked other questions, but that's the question he asks. Teshuva, he says the response is as follows. Vadai, most definitely, midas harachamim, hi kiyumoy shaloilam. The midah of the rachamim is the operating system of maintenance of the world. Kiyumoy shaloilam. And that, by the way, is almost an exact quote of a Rashi in Bereshis, where it says, Bereshis bara Elokim, and then later it says Hashem Elokim. Says Rashi famously, he created the world with din, Ra'ah she'ein ha'olam miskayim. He saw the world couldn't exist and keep going. Amad v'shitteif imoy midas harachamim. That's exactly what he's basically quoting. And all of this happened, by the way, on Rosh Hashanah. Let's not forget. Yes, I think I mentioned this before, I don't remember. This 3-step process you see in the creation of the world. Why did Hashem create? How did he create? How does it keep going? Why did he create? Chesed. Olam chesed ibana, in order to give. By definition, if you are going to create, think about it, it's always an act of love. Creating anything out of nothing, so to speak, is an act of love. Because that thing isn't there to justify its own existence. By definition. And that's what happens on Rosh Hashanah. That's why in Rosh Hashanah, we actually get an easy ride in a funny sense. Think about this. Because if Hashem is recreating us and the world on Rosh Hashanah, which he does, then you cannot be expected to justify your own existence. Because you don't exist in order to justify it. You hear that? That's why Yitzchok's always laughing. It's Yitzchok, that's Yitzchok. the implausibility of his own existence. His mother didn't have a womb. He's just, hello, this is all nuts. When you submit and yield to din, then you can laugh. He has the last laugh. Because it's only when we have the arrogance of thinking, I deserve, magiali, then it all becomes horrible because you realize, well, I don't really. But if you give that up genuinely and you say, and that's, refer back to our last shir on Rosh Hashanah, that's exactly the point. If you look back and you just say, this whole thing is it's hilarious. Everything's a joke, the whole thing. This doesn't make any sense. This defies any laws. There's no, I don't deserve it, so whatever you give me, great. So I'm happy, I use my time properly, but no demands, no expectation, no angst, no nothing. Then instead you can actually focus on, well, okay, so then why do you want me here? What am I meant to do? It's so liberating, if it's easy to say the words. To live it is quite something else. So we have these three things, even within, they're all on Rosh Hashanah. The desire to create is to give. What was the mechanism of creation itself? Bereshis bara Elokim, din. Chesed always begets din. Avraham begets Yitzchak. Because din is the biggest chesed, to enable to give somebody the ability to justify their own existence as much as they can. Teach a man to fish. Chesed is always the parent of din. But then immediately Hashem saw that this can't operate this way. And we'll see why in a minute. So he immediately brought in this partnership, this great partnership, this accommodation, which is called Rachamim, which is the kugel, a little bit of din, a little bit of chesed, as we'll come to in a minute. Just had another thought, 1 minute. Din. Oh, it'll come back to me. It was an important one, never mind. Now let's tackle din. And he says as follows. Mitzvah Rachamim is the operating system of the world. Yes, I remember what it was, and it's important. There is one dimension in which din needs to remain, and Hashem betchila Allah b'machshava livrei ha'olam b'midas hadin. It was Hashem's ideal, and that means in our world of ideals, it has to be uncompromising, totally. And that is a reality. Olam ha'machshava it creates a reality. We'll only realize it later. There is one dimension in which, it's probably the only dimension in which you are absolutely in charge, not hindered and limited by time, by space, by reality, by anything. And that is the world of your aspiration and ambition and genuine, deepest rotzon. Deepest rotzon. Horetza b'shuva, let's come back to that. That's who you really are. And this morning I said to the men, I gave a shit to the men, it's something I do, I haven't done it here. I used to do it sometimes in conversation with people. And you can ask yourself the following question. I used to say, it's a nasty question. I would say, tomorrow you buy a lottery ticket and you win the triple rollover Euro Millions. You now have 80 million euro in the bank. What do you do with the rest of your life? Whatever the answer is, that's who you are. Because the rest is all fluff and excuses. That's your rotzen. That's who you are and what you are. You hear that? And that needs to still find expression. It's not the modern notion of telling kids, oh, you can do whatever you want to do. That's rubbish. You can't. We are limited. And that's just setting them up for failure and disappointment. But we need to demand of ourselves, there is an olam, and on Rosh Hashanah we come to terms with that, because that's what it is. Rosh Hashanah is recreating the world of the ideal. According to one opinion, according to a number of opinions in Chazal, it never even happened. According to what Teshuva says, that actually Hashem created the world in Nisan. In Elul, he thought to create the world. So we're commemorating a day that nothing even happened. And how do we commemorate it? By doing nothing, just standing and listening to the shofar. That's it. It all makes sense, because that's all he actually wants. He doesn't want us to do. He doesn't need us to do. It's the hardest thing is to submit and to yield, like Adam Arishon when he was created. All he had to do was not do. By choosing not to do is accepting the supremacy, the malchus of Hashem, and yielding. And that's the hardest place of all to do it, is in our brain, in our Kodesh HaKadoshim, because that's the only place that we are free to make decisions, to choose. And we will then inhabit that world. We create. You actually create something with that. It's not. It is something that we will then inhabit that world in Olam Haba when we're not limited. That's why an oila, korban oila, which is totally burnt up, the Gemara says ba al hirhure halev. That's when you bring it. You bring korban oila for improper thoughts. Because in the world of thought and ideals and aspiration and ambition, there is no compromise. In the real world, oh boy, are we limited. But that has to be kept alive. We need to be connected to that, because that is actually where your neshama operates. Not your ruach, not your nefesh. Your neshama operates neshama b'meichi. Sorry, I got a bit carried away, but it's a really, 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 one doesn't get the opportunity often to share that, and it just fell into my head. Yes, go on, please.
So, there's not doing is basically not...
Not doing is the greatest doing.
But it's an active not doing.
It's a self-restraint.
Then what I'm saying, it's
Self-restraint.
not just like...
Okay, correct. You are tempted. Do you want to eat from the Eitzadas? Yes, I'd love to. I've got a million cheshbon, that's why I should. But God said not. So you have that inner...
It's like, I'm not doing anything.
No. It's when there is a struggle, there is a struggle. That is actually, in Jewish thought, that is the only area where you self-actualize. Which is why Hakol b'dei Shamayim chutz mi yiras Shamayim, not chutz mi ahavas Hashem. Okay. Let's go on. The 3 questions he asks now. The world couldn't last at all without rachamim. Nevertheless, there is a way that midas hadin, ein midas hadin loike, midas hadin is not denied totally. And I'm going to hurry this up a little bit, and you can look at it inside if you want, but I'm going to give it to you 3, as an educator, always learned that, I'm going to give you 3 words, that's all. The 3 questions, I'm going to summarize them in 3 words. Immediate, total, irreversible. That's Aleph, Beis, and Gimel. Immediate, total, and irreversible. I'll explain. Russia, I believe, recently gave Mr. Navalny a gift. You got it. Okay. The Sam Mavet Germanit. Yeah, it's poison. So it was just a current political joke. Anyway, so now here's the thing. He was given a certain dosage. Let's assume somebody imbibes a certain dosage of poison. And that amount, relative to your metabolism, your body weight, blah, 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 it's lethal. What happens? Whatever it happens, if you have a lethal dose, you drop dead. Not in 3 weeks' time. You fall off a building, splat. Not in 3 weeks' time, and it actually doesn't make a difference, sorry. It actually doesn't make a difference. Whether you jump, you were pushed, actually the size and shape of the splat makes no difference. It is what it is. So, newsflash, you do an Aveira. An Aveira is a very real, it is a spiritual act with real consequences. It's not arbitrary. There is a spiritual parallel set of laws of nature. In fact, they are the inner workings of the external physical laws of nature. But be that as it may. And in the same way, we have no expectation that if you put your hand in a fire, that you won't get burnt. So doing an Aveira there is a consequence. There's very little punishment in Judaism. Very little. There is consequence. So, number 1, when you do an Aveira, there should be an immediate consequence, whatever that is. And if it would be the equivalent of something which is where the consequence would be spiritual, whatever it is, then so be it. Number 1, the expectation would be that there will be an immediate consequence, whatever it is. Number 2, that it will be total. This is a bit more complicated the way he put it. I don't want to go into it. So, but the word I would use is total. So in other words, if Mr. Navalny, if it would have been a lethal dose, he wouldn't have just got a Kopfschmerz. Whatever it is, it is. It is immediate and it's total. And the most bothersome one of all is Shaloyeh Tikkun Lachet Klal. It's irreversible. Any act which is irreversible, physically, there is no difference whatsoever between the physical consequences of an activity where nature does not allow for it to be reversible. There's no difference between that and a sin. The spiritual consequences, whatever they are. And here he gives a very graphic moshel, and I'm going to give it to you very quickly. Forgive me, I'm warning you, it is graphic. I'm going to pad out the moshel slightly. Imagine, chas v'shalom, somebody is unfaithful in a marriage, as a result of which there is a child is born. A mamzer. And this kid has done nothing wrong. This kid is all alone in the world. And the husband takes the kid in to their house and loves it and cares for it and looks after it and clothes it and feeds it and walks it down the chuppah and cares for it like one of their own. Wow. The very existence of the child is a testament to an infidelity. Got news for you. When we do an Aveira, we create a negative, malicious, malevolent, toxic spiritual entity. Call it a malach, call it whatever word you like. But it's a spiritual entity which needs nurturing, needs a life pack of some sort. It needs sustenance, spiritual, obviously. So it goes to Hashem. Hashem says, what do you want from me? Who created you? Let them sustain you. And at that point, if they would come to us, they would take our neshama. Well, we created them. They need, Hashem says, you know what, come, I'll look after you. That's the equivalent. Billions and billions and billions and billions of very real, negative malachim. Hashem brings them in, as it were. And that is the real meaning, say the Kabbalists. Next time you bench, think about this. Hazon es ha'olam kuloi betuvoi b'chein b'chesed u'barachamim. That's what it's really referring to. And that's why Hashem is considered, if you look in the Torah Devera, on one of the Yud Gimel Midas, he is noisei ovain. He is melech olov. He is ashamed. He is, there's a stronger word, it's not polite. He is, it's a form of shame. And noisei ovain, Moshe Cordovero, Torah Devera says, if you can empathize with Hashem's, so to speak, think about how he is shamed, so to speak, publicly. There are billions and billions and billions of these that Hashem, because the alternative is that they come and take our life back. And then to copy that midah. Nice say ovain. But that's a story for another time. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just wondering regarding the story of them or the example of the
Yes. Yeah.
I remember once a long time ago, not here, there was like on the Shabbos table a conversation coming up that someone might be a mamzer or something like that. And then immediately the people around were like jumping up and saying, no, we're not just not talking about that. It's not existing. It's not existing, not only as gossip, but it's also it's not sort of, we don't talk about that. It's just not there. And so that somehow conflicts actually with the idea of that absolute truth, of the sort of absolute truth.
I agree.
Because
there is something,
things that exist.
Absolutely.
But then when you don't give them verbal
well, it may not be appropriate discussion for a Shabbos table. That, I think...
Okay, there's one, of course, in terms of gossiping, sneers, everything, of course. But apart from that, of course...
I must tell you, as a rabbi, I have had occasion to deal with this.
But then what happened?
Well, that's another whole... That's a halachic question. And yeah, we're kind of going off. These things do, these things do happen and they need dealing with. I mean, whatever, a reality is a reality. We're talking here more about the moral, we're talking here not about the legalistic or the halachic implications. And I'm using this, I was just really dramatizing his mashal, to tell you the truth. But you're making another point, which is also valid, but legalistic. The things do happen and they need to be dealing with, of course. We don't shy away from a reality is a reality.
But then on the other hand, there is justice, and justice for this specific person, let's say, he's not accountable. I mean, it's not his fault.
So again, that's another discussion which I'm happy to have. By the way, Mamzer Talmud Chochem Kodim L'Kohen Gadol Am Haaretz. There is nothing stopping the Mamzer being the Gadol, the greatest leader of Klal Yisrael. By the way, you may not marry a Jewish woman.
Yeah.
But he can be the Gadol Hador. No question about it. That's another whole story. Yeah, we kind of, that's not, yeah. It's a meritocracy in that sense. And that's another whole, yeah. The question here is asking, question number 3. So question number 1 was, consequence of an Aveira should be immediate. Question 2 is it should be total. And question 3 is it should be irreversible. And here, I told you about the mamzer, but imagine you're standing in the dock in court and you've murdered somebody. And it's incontrovertible. You've admitted, it's on camera, And the judge says, do you have anything to say for yourself? Yes, Your Honor. I am truly, deeply, madly, really, really sorry. The judge says, okay, duly noted. Life sentence. Whoa, sorry, Judge. You didn't hear me? Let me say it again. I'll cry again. No problem. Here we go. And I mean it. And let's say you really do mean it. You really do mean it. But there's a corpse there, and that is irreversible. And we just have to deal with. It is no different. The notion that the consequence of an Aveira should be any different to that, it's exactly the same. But we become conditioned. Teshuva, whatever, I don't know, Teshuva. It's insane. It makes no sense. And it certainly is not in line with Mishpat or Din or... And the other two, and we're actually going to see, because in his answer, he will deal with the first two slightly differently as to how he deals with the third. And I'm going to give you the answer. Let's do it now. I'll do it outside because it'll take too long. You're welcome to take it away with you. And the language here is incredibly precise, and there's so many layers of meaning here. It goes as follows. Midas HaChesed says, you did an Aveira, there, never mind. Okay, whatever, fine, no problem. No consequence. Din says, drop dead on the spot. Pretty much. Basically, hello, I gave you breath, I gave you a brain, I gave you this, and you used the things against me. Sei gesund. Have a nice death. Whatever. You're gone. You've just actually disconnected yourself from reality. You've written yourself out of the script. Goodbye. And it's not a punishment. It just is. It's just the consequence. Now here, let's deal with the first two first. So here we have a conversation. Let's imagine a conversation between Chesed and Din. Chesed says, all right, whatever. Din says, drop dead on the spot. Rachamim says, Midas Adin, turns to Midas Adin, and says, you will get your day in court. But not just yet. After 120 years, there will be total accountability. So you're not going to be denied. There's just a bit of a delay. That's point number one. And that is a chesed, that there should be any delay at all. But it hasn't totally denied Din, because Din will still get its day in court. And point number two is that the consequence will not only be delayed, but it won't be total. Sometimes what Hashem will do is, Midas Adin would say, if there is to be a consequence, you don't drink a lethal dose and get a mild headache. That makes no sense. So Midas Adin says, drop dead now. Midas HaChesed says, there, never mind. Rachamim says, you'll have a bit of a challenge in your life with something or other. It'll be partial, total, a nudge, a yisurim, whatever word you want to call it, a challenge. So it is a trickle-down effect. It's a little bit. It's not the whole thing. That will be held in abeyance. The time will come. Midas Adin has to. It will happen. Ki chol derachav mishpat. And it has to be so. Ki masha nachon nachon. But not just yet. And when something does happen to us, maybe as a result of something negative we've done, it'll just be a small amount. It'll be just a nudge. Hashem saying, come on, do better, possibly. And then there's always the element of doubt, because you never know when something happens to you, whether it's because you've done something bad or whether... And that's another whole shmooze, not for now. How do you know what's what? Beseder. And then finally, I'm afraid we have to do this bit inside. No choice. Gimel. Now here, he's out of options. Because here, the existence, listen carefully, the existence of Teshuva is Chesed Gomor. The operating mechanism of Teshuva is Rachamim. Say that again. That Teshuva should exist at all, i.e., that there should be such a concept of the notion of the reversibility of something which is irreversible. You can't paper over that crack. There's no two ways to cut it. Teshuva is created before the world, even though before the world there was no before, because that's time. But it means it operates above and beyond the laws of causality, cause and effect. They cannot be squared. It's chesed gomor. That teshuva should exist. That should be a concept of taking an act which is by definition irreversible, and somehow that it should be reversible in any way at all, can only be chesed gomor. However, the operating mechanism, it's not just a total chesed, because what did we say? What's chesed? Chesed is there, never mind. No. There is a depth to tshuva, and here's where we're really just getting started. I'm not going to keep that much. This should be a fridge magnet, those words. Shete choshev, akiras horotzain, akiras hamaisa. Notice how that word rotzain keeps cropping up with tshuva. Horotzain is tshuva, yeah, you see? Shete choshev. We're on it's on the page 2, and it's by Gimel. That should be a fridge magnet. Shete choshev, akiras harotzim, akiras hamaisa. This is the operating system of Teshuva. I'll explain what it means. What cannot be reversed is the consequences of an act. But do you know what can be reversed? What did we talk about? Which is that which is closest and dearest to you, and which is above time and space and unlimited, your mind, your brain, your deepest rotzing. That goes for the good and for the bad. You can detach. You can utterly, what is reversible, what is totally reversible and makes total sense, is your emotional attachment to an activity that has taken place in the past. Because there was a point in time when I really wanted to do this, and now I so regret having done it, genuinely. And therefore I have detached. That is utterly reversible. That makes total sense. If it's real and deep and elemental, it's rotzoid, it's who you are and what you are. Rotzoid is bigematria makoyer, it's bigematria shmoi, by the way. Just remembered.
What does it mean?
I'll explain. So it will be reckoned that the uprooting of the desire of having sinned will be like the uprooting of the act. Rega. So again, the notion that an irreversible act should in any way be reversible is insane. That's chesed gomer. That there is such a thing. But that is chesed gomer. That means that is above the notion of causality, of fairness. That's a chesed. How Hashem does that, by the way, we're not even going to get to that tonight. That's kapara, the slicha. There's so many different. But there is a certain underlying logic to it, which we can relate to, which is that regret, provided it's real and deep and sincere and true, and I did an activity and I wanted to do it, you can absolutely change your mind. Your mind is the only thing you can change. So Hashem will reckon the akira sarotzain, the real uprooting of that desire. In other words, the emotional attachment to that activity, he will reckon it, I'm translating at the moment, he'll reckon it like the uprooting of the act. Now he goes further than that, but I want to here bring in, because I'm only going to keep you another 5 minutes. I want to bring in an incredible thought from the master, one of the masters of Polish Hasidus, Reb Tzadok HaKohen. And we have to be quite careful with this one because it is antinomian. It's interesting. I'm going to try and give it to you. You know what? Let's try and do it inside. If you have the sheets there, it says Magnum Opus Tzidkas HaTzadik Ois Mem. If you have it here. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, I must tell you this, just because I have to share this. It occurred to me a few years ago. I haven't got my... Oh, there's a board marker here, look at this. What do we say? V'hu rachum, right? Yaakov rachamim. Yechaper ovoin. V'loi yashchis. V'hirbal ha'shivakoi. These are the 3 points of the Ramchal in reverse order. Rachum, yechaper ovoin. He wipes it away. That's the point 3. V'loi yashchis. He won't totally destroy. That's point 2. V'hirbal ha'shivakoi. He'll delay. There's point 3. It's all there. And it occurred to me once.
Isn't 2 the opposite of that?
No.
Yashchis would be 10.
So it says, no, because he's Rachum, this is the response. Because he's the Rachum, 3 things. Yechaper Ovoin, can be wiped away. V'lo yashchis, he won't destroy. V'hir v'lo shapa, he'll delay, he'll wait. That's absolutely those three things of the Ramchal. One night davening Maragit came to me. That's all there, and we just have to get the Siyata D'Shmaya to think about it. Now, let's do, this is classic Polish Hasidus, and it's utter genius. It opens up a whole new world. Ika Teshuva, ois mem. Ika Teshuva. Sheyoir Hashem Einov, sheyihiu zdoinois kizachios. Ois mem. Ois mem. There's two. Yeah, ois mem. Listen to this. There is a Gemara which says, and I know I'm going on a bit, but there is a Gemara which says that it is possible if you do Teshuva out of love, whatever that means, and we'll see, maybe, Teshuva out of love, then your Averas turn into mitzvahs. Now that just sounds hocus pocus. Come on, what do you mean Averas turn into mitzvahs? How can an Avera turn into a mitzvah? He says, Ika Teshuva, says Reb Tzadok, the main Teshuva is that Hashem should open your eyes, that your Averas, you should perceive them as mitzvahs. Rotzalema. That means sheyakir v'yovin. He should recognize shekol ma shachota hayagamkein barotzain Hashem Yisbarach. That everything that happened. And this is why I'm not sure I'm going to put this on YouTube, because you need to be very mature to appreciate this carefully. That's why I said antinomian. Hashem runs the world. If something happened, that means in the final analysis, he allowed it to happen. So in some way, it fitted into his Rotzain. He wanted it to happen. That doesn't excuse you if you used your bad Bechira to do it. Doesn't excuse you. But if he did not want it to happen, it would not have happened. The gun would have jammed, you'd have fallen down the stairs, the train would have been late, whatever. So that's the reality. So when you actually totally realize, you sublimate your Rotzain, that word again, to the Rotzain Hashem, and you realize that Shekol Ma Shechota Hoyagam came Barotzain Hashem Yisbarach. K'mesha Amru Chazal. Ilmole, okay. V'hinei. Okay, he's now bringing some sources, which we can go... Okay, that's enough. There's actually enough there already. It gets a bit more problematic. But that is enough. Let's think about this a second. The reality is that when you did an Aveira, Hashem didn't want you to do that Aveira. But that the Aveira happened, and therefore its toxic consequence is because Hashem then decided he would let it go through. It somehow fits into his whole big plan, whatever. We cannot know that. In Kabbalistic terms, b'makom yediyah ein bechira, b'makom bechira ein yediyah. Where there is total knowledge, there is no free will, and vice versa. Zerizah. If you deepen your appreciation and understanding until you actually genuinely reach that point, and that's really what Rosh Hashanah is about, you then sublimate your own rots and you recognize and realize that if it happened, and thus its consequence, Hashem wanted it to happen. What part did I play in it? So where do I come into this? The decision. That's reversible. I'll say that again. It is both genius and challenging. Again, you can, if it is possible for somebody to reach a situation where they yield and submit their understanding of the way the world runs to the point that they are genuinely able to appreciate that something only happened because Hashem allowed it to happen. Had he not wanted it to go ahead, it wouldn't have happened. And when you genuinely reach that point, then your whole, it was Hashem's Ratzon. So where did I go? Where do I come into this? Do you know where you came into it? You used your free will and you made that decision. So the only connection to it is, your only connection to it is the world of decision. Well, if that's the only connection, that's utterly reversible. Of course that's reversible. It's simple and genius and profound and challenging at the same time. You have to be very careful with this, and this is why I said you have to be very, very careful. I only say this, take it as a mark of respect, and sophisticated thinking, not say, well, anything that happens, all that, then wants it to happen anyway. So I got no, even though that is the truth. And by the way, with this, now you understand something so beautiful. Shabbos and Teshuva share the same letters. Mizmo, Odom Rishon met Cain coming out from the Beis Din, and he says, what happened? How did your din go? And he says, Asisi tshuva v'nispasharity. He said, I did tshuva and an accommodation was reached. Now we understand. So Odom Rishon immediately burst out into song. And what did he compose? Mizmo shir l'yom HaShabbos. Really? He said, that's the greatness of tshuva? I didn't know. And he immediately bursts into song and he composes Mizmo shir l'yom HaShabbos. The only one of Tehillim which is specified for a day of the week. There's only one teeny little problem. If you read Mizmo shir l'yom HaShabbos, it doesn't say anything about Shabbos at all. Toiv lahoidos Hashem, lahoidos, that's vidui. Ulezamer l'shem chayelyon, lahagim baboker chazdech v'nos v'aleres, ali yosem v'nam al-gem v'chinik yismachtani Hashem farach ma'aseh echronim. What is it? What is Mizmo shir l'yom HaShabbos? You know what it is? To be technical, it's a chiastic structure. It is 7 psukim, raising challenges of what we see evil and we don't understand and all the problem. That's what it's all about. The wicked flourish, and then there's this little posuk at the top. V'atom morim la'olam Hashem, you reign supreme. I see my with lahagid kiyosar Hashem tsuri. Sorry, the job Raquel wasn't here. Tsuri v'loyav nosaboy. He's married. There's no wrong. There's no bad. There's no evil. That's true, but we just explained it. Shabbos, we step back and we're able to, when we yield and we submit to the Ratzon Hashem, I don't get involved in the creating process. I change my whole perspective on the world, on everything. That is Teshuva. It's all just about changing that perspective. Now it makes sense. And on Rosh Hashanah, and I say Teshuva, and Yom Kippurim, the more we are able to genuinely, it's a process, internalize this and work on it. To that extent, then what happens? Then that Aveira, it wasn't an Aveira, it was actually a mitzvah. So the simple pshat, as always I understood it, becomes a mitzvah. Why? Because it was the catalyst for you reaching this deeper understanding. Fine, and that's still true, but that's superficial. It's much deeper than that. It's much deeper than that. With Reb Tzadok, it's much deeper than that. It's challenging. It needs a lot of thought, and ultimately it's a massive process. Again, I stress that does not mean, of course, that we look back at our Aveira and say, "Oh well, I don't bear that moral responsibility." This is the challenge, and that's why I don't say this to every group, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to put this on YouTube. I haven't decided yet because it can be many people. But it's a whole new world. It should be a whole new world. Horoitze, now we understand Horoitze b'Teshuva because it's all about your Rotze. That's what it's all about. And ultimately finding, it's liberating. But now at least there is some logic to it. It's not just totally, it's actually, you're connecting to a much deeper reality. For some reason, Hashem wanted to allow that particular toxic consequence to happen in the world. And what he does with that is frankly his business. But its connection to me was only when I owned it as the part of the decision-making process, that moral, autonomous decision. And if it is real and deep, that is utterly reversible by yielding everything back to him. It's got to be real, it's got to be deep, it's not easy, anybody can say the words. But that then is Adonis Nasik is Chias, and then we turn everything round. And that's why the Satan on Rosh Hashanah, we blow and more and more and more. And you realize that I'll stop here. So I think there's much more to say, but it's just one very, very, there's many, many more details. This Mesilas Yesharim, there is a lot more to say in terms of Rachamim and Chesed, all the details, but I think we managed to get through the basic idea, I think. Happy to take questions.